Not expanding. You see, everything when people talk about the universe, they also talk about how it is spreading out and stuff. I just saw a part that I'm going to just show you right now.
Same stuff. Let's
All right.
keep
Another one,
moving
check.
on. Okay, here we go. This is Bruce Ryan. Bruce Ryan is from Alexandria, Virginia. He says, I once heard Neil say that there is no center of the universe. Hey, what's up with that? If the universe started from a single point, there has to be a center at some moment. Okay.
All right, Delilah, dig us out of that one.
So, this is the again where our intuition is fooling us if we think about what we're used to. But in fact, we know, for instance, that the universe is probably not shaped like a sphere. But for a moment, suppose it was. If it was shaped like a sphere, and you're a person who lives on this sphere, who's to say what point is more special than any other point on that sphere? And so when we say that the universe is expanding, it's not talking about us expanding away from any one given point that's the center. It's the whole thing expanding in size. Think of drawing a point on the surface of a balloon and then blowing up the balloon. All points on the surface of the sphere get farther and farther away from each other, but none of them is more special than the others. And this is what we mean when we say there's no center to the universe, despite the fact that it's expanding.
My battery dying just then. This is my expression. Okay, perfect timing. I need to charge my crap. But let's move on from that. Okay, so what does that mean? First of all, besides the fact that we are not in, like, we're a three-dimensional universe, not a balloon on just one dimension, sort of, or two-dimensional, whatever. The point is, like you have any amount of spring or elastic, you stretch it, and what'll happen is stuff will be all moving away, right? And we assume that that means that the universe is expanding. And unfortunately, there's also the Great Attractor, where everything in a gigantic cluster, which we are a part of, is said to be also moving in this river that is heading towards a much bigger. Well, we're actually in. How do I put it? There are other videos. If I look up any Great Attractor video, you'll see. Yeah, I got some history. Okay. Great. Wow. Great Attractor. You see this shape. Now, here's the thing about this shape. Okay. The Great Attractor, this is our galaxy. This is this huge thing, and we're all flowing in that direction. Now, what exactly is that? What's going on? Well, what people don't understand, besides the fact that the Great Attractor is all flowing us in that direction, you notice that it forms from these little lakes, and it forms from these little strands, and then it goes into this big arching, like, it's like lightning but in reverse. Instead of spreading out in all directions, it's all pulling in from all directions. So we have like tiny groups of galaxies all pooling towards the stream towards the river towards whatever the great attractor is over here. Now, when I see this, okay, that shape, all of that, I also notice there has to be there's something about, like, when you pull on a bed sheet from one direction, how it all seems like if you have stuff on it, it'll all gather in one spot. Now, I can do this because I got a tissue and whatever else. The point is that I try to make is that the great attractor could also be that electromagnetism has a flow to it. The moment that electromagnetism starts to flow in some direction, it wants to continue to flow in that direction. Path of least resistance and all of that jazz. So what could be happening is that there is an electromagnet out there, natural, right? Not just a black hole. This is not about gravity. Forget about gravity for a moment and think of something where it is starting, if it starts to flow the electromagnetism towards these little streams and these little rivers, right? All pulling towards that one spot. It's kind of like an eddy current that happens when you shoot something through water. Everything else flows along with it. You can use some fluid dynamics and you can find out how that's going to turn out. So, the initial question about the universe expanding, why don't we see a center? And when she talks about a balloon expanding and all of that, you have to realize that there is also a different little factoid. We talk about a Big Bang. There is evidence, other people have talked about it, there is no such thing as a Big Bang. It's more of a ignition. That the bang could have happened, but relative to everything, like, who cares when it initially started? Because by the time everything starts forming, it has basically uniform everywhere, right? At one point there was nothing, and at the next point everything has been initiated. Now, when I look at that, I end up thinking about quarks and how if you separate them, they end up making a new quark. And the reason for that is because of the energy that is there and because of even subparticle, not just subatomic, but subparticle little pieces that are floating around everywhere. And it's the same reason why we have, it's part of the reason why we have virtual particles, because these bits of energy are flowing around through space, and as they intersect each other, this intersection point makes a bigger blip for just that moment, and then it disappears again because they keep going on their way. These are all moving in crazy speeds. Saying about virtual particles and all that. So, what you really want to say, the universe is not expanding. That has always been a false notion. Because the moment you think of something expanding, you think of stuff and a substance inside of it. There are all these other little bits. Well, I mean, if you can think of the electromagnetism as being the substance, and then planets, stars, and galaxies, atoms, and asteroids and whatnot, comets, meteors, all these different objects moving along with the electromagnetism. Yeah, you can think of everything as being in a substance capable of having it all expand away from each other. But what you don't seem to remember is that an object in space, or objects in general, once in motion, they're going to stay in motion unless acted on by something else. Right? One of the laws of physics. So, you got to realize there's nothing to affect the motion of a planet, a star, a galaxy out in space. So when they're set in motion, when they started moving, was in the initial conditions that made everything. And after that, they don't need any more motion to just keep going. The galaxies are going to just keep moving. The stars are all going to be moving around the galaxies in their orbits. The planets are all going to be moving around the stars, moons around the planets, asteroids around everything, for whatever reason. And it's interesting, could you call the asteroid belt a fragmented planet? I mean, it could be one. It's a lot of mass, but it's basically just cooled down little bits of gas that happen to cool all separate little bits to cause the asteroids. It doesn't have to have been a planet to start with anyhow. So what's happening with the universe is that stuff is just moving through space. It's uninhibited. There is nothing to pull around with it except for the great attractor. And so it's not that the universe is expanding. In fact, it's pretty stationary. It's just that stuff likes to move around, and as it moves around, it's going to spread out, move away from each other, because that's just how things are. If you do the same kind of test with gases, once they bump around each other and they're allowed to continue to move indefinitely, they're just going to spread out all over the place inside of that box. Like if you put a very tiny amount of gas in a box, a small little puff, and it'll just spread out naturally because they bump around each other, and then after that point they just go to wherever they're headed, and then that's it. There's nothing else to think about. And in space, it's an infinite box, and there's nothing pulling them down like gravity that's enough to stop them from moving. So yeah, dark energy, not needed. Everyone thinks that the universe has to keep expanding because something's pushing on it. You don't need that. If I throw a wrench out there, it's just going to keep going, unless it doesn't have enough gravity to, unless it doesn't have enough velocity, right? But if I were to shoot a planet, let's say that I get a planet close to a star, right? The star shoots it out towards interstellar space, right? That planet ain't going to do anything but just keep flying. It doesn't need dark energy to keep flying. It's just going to keep going because there's nothing else to stop it. It might get redirected by nearby galaxies and stuff. It might bash into a nearby galaxy, which would definitely stop it. Probably. But mostly, if it just keeps having nothing else bump into it, it's gonna just keep going. There is no need for dark energy to even be a thought in people's minds. It's childish that it's in people's minds, including NASA, but they think of it. They think there has to be dark energy. And dark matter is electromagnetism. Electromagnetism is the stuff that's literally holding everything together. It's the energy that is everywhere. As they say, a field of energy. Of course, it's not just a two-dimensional, it's literally, we are in an ocean of dark energy, which is otherwise known as, just commonly known as, electromagnetism. The only thing is that people dismiss electromagnetism because they think that it can't work in this way. But what you'll understand is that when you have stuff like stars, you are working with an electromagnetic dynamo. They are constantly flowing out with those little bits of solar flares and whatever else. Those are electromagnetically charged poofs of stuff shot out from the star, even as far out as the edge of the solar system. Like, there is no end to where these solar winds can go. And that's not because of dark energy, or it's not because of like any other innocuous dark energy. It's just electromagnetism. It's just their own momentum. It's just their initial, inertia. I get disturbed when I hear things like the universe expanding and dark energy, because it means we're not educated yet enough on it. And that's fine. There are some people who are specialists and they focus on whatever specific field they're focusing on, and maybe they dabble in other things. I like to dabble in literally everything and know about all sorts of things, and I've been in this for decades. The problem is, and the other thing about me, I'm not around so many people who are constantly like saying the same type of things. Like, we can have discoveries, we can know new things. It's so nice to be able to know that people are learning all sorts of things, like how the James Webb Space Telescope told us that there were galaxies even super far away, further than we've ever looked, which should have been the beginning of everything, and it actually doesn't have to be that that's the beginning of everything. We have no idea when the universe actually started. We have no idea how big the universe is. Some estimates are 45 billion light years across, and that's just based off of our observable universe and where we assume it has led to today. But if you expand the idea of where things started, then you also have to expand where we think it's going to be. There's a lot out there. Another thing that they mentioned in this video, another thing that they mentioned in this video that I'm just gonna touch on is they said that if a universe was spherical, would you be able to see like the back side of your own head of the Milky Way? That's not how spheres work. I don't think you get it that the geometry of the universe, if it was spherical, it's not, but if it was, you're going to hit the edge of it, right? And you're going to be able to go and see things that are on the far side of the universe, on the other side of the sphere, but if we are somewhere anywhere outside of the perimeter of the sphere, you won't be able to see any of that just by looking straight forward. Okay? That's not how it works. Yeah. Kind of messed up little, like, visual geometry of stuff. If the universe was spherical, you would still not be able to see. You need a different kind of geometry, not spherical geometry, and then you'd be able to see the back of the Milky Way, or you'd be able to see the Great Attractor, because apparently it's behind the Milky Way. It's like relative to us and the center of the Milky Way galaxy, and then there's the Great Attractor. We're all in this perfect little line, as if God doesn't want us to see his face. It's just ironic and whatever. So, when I think of the universe expanding, no, it doesn't do that. No dark energy is pushing everything all around. It's just, it was pushed, and it will continue to move where it was originally pushed to. It will not stop, it will not slow down, it will just keep going, and it's not speeding up. That's a miscalculation. I don't know why or how anyone thought that the universe was speeding up. Because when you look further and further away, you're also looking into the past. Light takes a certain amount of time to get to us. It takes like 8 minutes to get from the Earth to the Sun, vice versa, from the Sun to the Earth. So when you go to another galaxy, when you go to another star, light will take a certain amount of time to get to us. We're seeing something that has happened. So you have to do those calculations and think of, if it's moving this much in our scale, it could have taken it likely took billions of years to move that distance. And if we're only seeing the light from that distance and we're not calculating it properly, like, all of that light can still get to us at different times, at different distances, different moments. And when it comes to looking at stuff that far away, we have to do a lot of calculations to figure out exactly when it started shining its light back towards us. So if something's moving away from us, it could take, like, this closer stuff could be taking thousands of years to move away from us, and we would see it as days, or it could take millions of years to move away from us, the same distance. So it's actually moving slower. You gotta be sure about all of those measurements, and I haven't found one scientist ever talk about the proper dimensions of things. And it would be great to have something like that as a three-dimensional model. Besides the Great Attractor, I haven't seen any three-dimensional model stuff. Let's take a look one more time. So when I saw something like this, right? When I saw something like this, where they look at the Great Attractor and they show you things like the flow of stuff. I'm not sure if this is the same video I was looking at. This wasn't the same video I was looking at. Wait, who the hell is this? Insane Curiosity. I don't think that's the one I'm wanting to see. Maybe it's Astrum? I don't know. It probably was Astrum because that's the one I've actually seen. Yeah, some stuff like this, where you can actually see all the different projections of where things are moving. Look at all those little dots moving. Great video, great analogy, great friggin' like just look at how friggin' cool that is. All of those little galaxies all flowing towards where we assume is Great Attractor. So that type of stuff, that gets me going, man. Love that type of stuff because the idea of us beyond a galaxy that's all heading towards the one I was saying, it's possible that it's gonna collide in a way that's kind of smooth and fluid, and we don't have to worry about it. But again, time scale, like when will all this happen? We're talking about quadrillions of years. We're talking about an entire other epoch of like humanity's 10,000 years. This is like trillions and trillions of times longer than we have even existed. We don't have to think about it. Most people think in hundreds of years or whatever else, and this is happening like literally million extra more the time that we expect it to all take place. Like just the collusion of the Orion Galaxy with the Milky Way is like millions of years. And that's still something relatively close. This is something that's like so far away that it's like hundreds of millions of light years. Just with our galaxy, and then we have, I don't know how far it is with this entire massive cluster all pulling together. You have to think there's got to be some kind of flow of substance that's helping those, because otherwise the normal idea of what happens, right? When people talk about the idea of space-time curves towards an object, right? That only works on small scales, planetary and galactic scales. Once you go into galactic like clusters of galaxies, you no longer have that same geometry. As you see from these pictures, this is not a spherical transformation. It's something else going on here. It's something that is a flow, heading into another flow, heading into a dot. And these are fun. This is great to understand, to think about, to know about. Besides the fact that it proves that we are not just spreading out in all directions, we also have a greater structure that we are in. I personally think that this disproves that space-time is curving around objects. Or, to be more precise, I think that we need to stop using terminology such as space-time is curving, and we need to start adapting completely different terminology. Although it may seem like space-time is curving, what's really happening is objects are being attracted to large objects. One of the most interesting studies I've ever heard was that a 14-pound ball was used to attract like a tennis ball just with its own, like there was no magnets, nothing. It's just gravity. You move it close and the gravity of the small ball, relatively small. I mean, it's the size of a small bowling ball, but it's 14 pounds, is moving this very basic ping pong ball. And you gotta wonder, wait, so why aren't we using that as an infinite power source? Why do we always have to say that perpetual motion can't work? It's not. Anytime I mention perpetual motion, people click off because that's why I mention it at the end. But also, fair shake. Perpetual motion has been seen as not actively doing a thing that works. But you gotta admit, that duck that goes down is due to, you know, that toy from The Simpsons? That is due to a difference in temperature and pressure of the gas. Because at one pressure it wants to float up, and at another pressure it wants to sink down. And so as it gets to one point, it heats up, goes down, the thing goes down, and then it wants to flow in the opposite direction because it wants to float up again. So it goes and pushes it so that it sinks down, and then it lifts up again, thing gets heavy, goes down. It's a continuous cycle. It happens when the room is warm enough for it. And things like this could be made on a larger scale, but we notice it only as a desk toy because it's like too expensive to make into a big power supply that's going to last. And also, what happens when you have enough of these things in the same airspace is that they change the temperature of the airspace so that the effect no longer works. Everything becomes the same temperature. So it needs a varying temperature airspace, one that has maybe a bit of warmth and not exactly always staying at that temperature or something. It's like things like that, you gotta realize it is still perpetual. There's no reason to say that we can't use the motion of that thing to then make the heat that then makes the thing move. The only thing is people have made all sorts of experiments and fallen short because they forget about one piece of the puzzle or another piece, and they make something that's too simple, and they don't make an entire weather machine, which they gotta be doing if they really want something that's an internal system. But with gravity from these little orbs, that's a closed system. It's not using the gravity of our own Earth, it's using its own gravity to start pulling the tiny thing towards itself. So if you use a little bit of resistance, as it's pulling, it can then create enough that is also pushing the big ball away, and the attraction of it, unlike with magnetism, where you put it on a oh my god, they put it on a rolling thing and they had that be stationary. I'm talking about move everything. Allow it all to move. Allow it all to be pushing. The moment you get something to move towards that big ball, right, it forces the entire structure to move. And the structure resists it, it stops it from actually getting close enough. And then as it moves, everything else is also being pushed a little bit. So the big ball doesn't know that it's being pushed by the little ball, that it's pulling towards itself, right? It doesn't, obviously doesn't think at all it's a ball. But it's not that it can't pull it closer. It's that it's pulling it closer, but then the entire structure also shifts along with it. So it keeps wanting to pull it closer. You still should be able to do this type of mechanical thing with a magnet system, but the fact that you're able to have that kind of thing happen with gravity, and if you have the diorama so it's also moving along, like otherwise, when that ball isn't there, the ping pong ball will just stay there. It won't move in that direction on its own. Introduce the big ball, and it starts moving towards. And it could be, it really doesn't matter how it happens. Who cares if it's magnets, right? Or if it's electrostatic, like equilibrium. Because it could be electrostatic equilibrium, which is literally the definition of atomic gravity. People don't realize that also. That, like when you have folding proteins and stuff, or if you have a spring, spring is basically atomic gravity. It wants to, its natural position is to pull itself together, right? That's why water does things. There's bubble surface tension and all of that does things. And it all, like with the bubble surface tension, it is going to hold itself together as strongly as it can, and the strength lets go at some point so that the bubble can't get any bigger. Its bonds are holding it together, and it can't be any smaller because everything is spreading out as much as it can spread out. More bubbles solution, bigger bubble. Or if you have a solution that will connect and be thinner, you don't need as much solution, but you'll still get a bigger bubble. But it'll still make a spherical shape thing. Why don't I make a perpetual motion machine that actually works? I mean, I have a desk toy. It's made by fridge magnets. There's no battery in it, and it levitates on its own, and it will do that for another 100 years. The levitation is also not just pushing up on the thing, but it's also pushing it towards a plate. Now, what happens, there's a certain amount of force that the whole magnet system is applying. What happens if you're able to then utilize that force somehow? Is there a way? And the answer is there has to be some way. But I mean, if you were to allow it to move, you have to have some way of returning, otherwise it would just keep on moving, and then it would end up being over tilted, and it would just rest, and it would just not have any ability to press anymore. So you'd have to be able to apply the pressure and then continue having the pressure be applied. And if you think of a neodymium magnet, we're talking about 20 to 100 to 1,000 pounds of static, not electromagnet force that you can apply to something, to push something away or to hold something to that magnet. So you gotta be careful when working with those, but there's no reason to expect that we can't just make a machine out of that type of pressure. We should be able to do it. And if we can make it so that the electromagnetism, if we can get it to flow in a way that is continuous, then we don't have to think of about it as being just one push and then done. If we're able to make it into a circular system, the electromagnetism, simply by a stationary magnet, if we are able to make it go in a loop, it will continue to move things in that loop, right? Then you just set something in motion, it'll just keep going, like we see with those superconductors. You get them super cold, and it'll not just hover on top, but it also, like, it is connected to a certain amount of electromagnetism provided by the magnets, and it just allows it to flow at that distance. And you can have it be upside down, you can have it be on its side, whatever you want to do, and it will be relative to the magnet that far, and it will just keep on going. The difference is, of course, you want to have a superconductor that you don't have to constantly keep cold. But imagine, and the other thing is frictionless systems. Once you get something moving, like literally any amount of force will counter the motion that it has, because it has, even if it has momentum, it has no real inertia to it. It has no real, like, stopping power of its own. Like a giant rolling ball has a lot more stopping power than something that's floating in midair, suspended, zero friction, right? And there's something about, like, flywheels and how you have to put a certain amount of power into those flywheels, but once you get them going, you could have them utilize that power and speed for a certain amount of time. And the main problem is, in order to make them a viable power solution, you have to have something that's able to continuously levitate the flywheel to make it so it's continuous and doesn't dissipate over time. And you gotta keep on putting more speed into the flywheel, and then later on take the speed out. Again, we always talk about the expanding universe, something simple, and then I go on to all these other ideas. Some people call that fluff. Man, you didn't have to keep on listening. I said my piece, but then I also said like a dozen other things. I know. It doesn't make the first part of it not true. It just makes other parts of it also known to you. So if I increase the title to be "and," then it's not so much fluff as it's just me ranting about stuff, and it's not succinct, and it's not as nice, and whatever else. But you look at Star Talk, and they bring in all these other questions, and I'm just one person who has a lot of thoughts. Anyway, check out the Science Meat playlist where I talk about this and all sorts of other things. And thank you for hanging out with me. I like it when you do. I'll see you in the next video. This was like 45 minutes. Holy crap. There is something to be said about how if I want to talk about one specific topic, I should try to make a script. I should try to make this and that work so it's succinct, so it's something it's easily, you know, it's something that you can actually follow. But I'm not making this for the everyday person. I'm making this for the people working in NASA who need to grow up. Start looking at the universe for what it actually is, explaining it for what it actually is. Because it's disappointing that we're still using terms like time dilation when we know that there are other explanations for this thing that happens to your atomic clock in a satellite. So one question that you might have, well, have you said the same thing in every one of your videos? No, I have said different things in each one of my videos. Sometimes there's overlap, but there is also a bunch of different things that I talk about. And you'd have to watch all of my videos to know about all of them, but I mean, Kyle Hill has all sorts of stuff that he mentions in his episodes also when he does things. I'll be playing games soon enough. Thanks for hanging out with me. I like it when you do. I will see you in the next video. Toodles.